Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jawad Ahsan. Jawad is the CFO at Axon, the global leader of connected public safety technologies like tasers and body cameras. He is the author of a new book called What They Didn't Tell Me, in which he draws upon his own personal experience to help people better manage their careers. This book helps people get past the things that get them stuck. As someone who spent 22 years in corporate America and experienced that move up the corporate ladder and the challenges associated with it, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So, Jawad, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And this book is really interesting. I'm excited to talk about it. So, I think before we dive into the book, it'd be nice to hear a little bit about your career, because from what I can tell, you moved up fairly quickly. I mean, it took you a while, but you achieved your goal. You ended up being in a C-suite at a major company at General Electric. And I think it'd be kind of interesting to hear a little bit about how you did that and then how you moved on to where you're at today.
Yeah, John, a lot of it was the way that GE was set up. It was for a long time this factory for leadership and for management. And I started in a leadership development program right out of college. Did that for quite a few years, actually. My first 5 years at GE were all in leadership development programs. I didn't get my first quote unquote real job until about 6 years in. And at that point, I had gotten so much exposure to different industries and business cycles, different GE businesses. GE is a much different company now, but when I was there, it was just sprawling and you had an opportunity to see different industries. And, it really was a type of company where the more you put into it, the more you got out of it. And so I actually have had a few people ask me, like, how did you get to become a public company CFO at age 37?
Right.
As if I found some shortcut. And I didn't. I worked 100-hour work weeks during my 20s.
Yes.
And there really wasn't any shortcut. I just, basically worked 2 decades worth in one. And GE was the kind of company that, the more you did that, the more you got out of it. And so I was there for 13 years, actually. And my last 4 years there, I was a divisional CFO. And it was a lot of what GE had laid out for me, right? Just I took different experiences and different aspects of finance, and I just got to see so much in such a short amount of time that I, got to a divisional CFO role. And it was that divisional CFO role that actually, I enjoyed so much, but I actually started thinking about what it would be like to be a CFO of an entire company and not just a division. And that's what led me to ultimately leave GE for a private equity backed CFO job.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you're right on top of something. And that is, if you're working for a big company like General Electric, I work for ABB, which was a large global company as well. There were so many opportunities to get education, get training, get experiences. And like you, I took advantage of every single one of those and got a lot of great, learning experience, and ended up running a plant at 32 years old. I got my first manufacturing plant. And then I just ran, 8 different manufacturing plants after that. So, but I took advantage of those learnings and those opportunities. And I think, when you're in a role like that, there's so much available to you. And it sounds like you really took advantage of those things.
Yeah, I was very fortunate in that regard. And lots of companies today have a similar blueprint where they, big companies are a great place, I think, to start a career because of exactly what you described.
Right. I often tell younger people when they're talking about starting their own business, they're like, what advice would you have for me just when I'm starting my own business? And I say, well, go work for a major corporation in your industry or in the thing you want to do and get all that free education, right? Get all that free knowledge and experience. And, I'm a better CEO now of a startup company that I would have been if I hadn't had all that experience,
Right.
working in, corporate America. So, yeah. So you've got a new book out. I want to talk to you about this. It's called What They Didn't Tell Me. So tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah. So the title is interesting. Each of the chapters in the book, the title of the chapter is a piece of feedback that I got. In many cases, it was something that was a little hard for me to hear at the time. But it was, there were just things that people had told me or said to me. And with time and experience and context, I understood that there was a deeper lesson to be learned. And so that's why the book is titled What They Didn't Tell Me, because I've now been able to contextualize those lessons and put them into a format that I think is actually pretty easy to read. It's basically like a memoir,
Mm.
And it's my story from when I graduated college to, to when I got to Axon and a little bit beyond. But it's really for folks to, to understand how I got to where I did, because I didn't have a blueprint. My parents came here from Pakistan. I was born here, first generation. They wanted me to be a doctor or an engineer, right? I talk
Right.
about this in the book. That's something that's in South Asian cultures is very dominant, right?
Hmm.
Your kids have to be a doctor, an engineer, maybe a lawyer.
Right.
And I tried that in college. I was a pre-med. I went in pre-med,
Okay.
and I got a C in chemistry my freshman year. My dad was devastated because he has his master's in chemical engineering, and he's a chemical engineer by trade. And so I said, guys, I can't do this. Like, I know you want this for me. I don't want this. And
Yeah.
I ended up being an economics major, and they were a little unsure what I was going to do with that. I ended up getting an internship with Fidelity Investments. And so they're like, all right, fine. At least he's going to, have a job.
Right.
And so they, from there, it progressed, and I got my job at GE, and then they were very supportive, but it was, a little unclear to me, like what, I didn't have that blueprint. I didn't go to an Ivy League school.
Hmm.
I didn't really have parents or other mentors I could follow that got to become C-suite executives. I had to figure it out along the way. And so, a lot of what I talk about in the book is how I did it. And a big part of that was just understanding that the further you get in your career, less and less of your success comes down to you individually, and
Mm.
more comes down to how effective you are at building teams,
Mm.
and how resilient those teams are. And that's probably the biggest thing I learned that people didn't tell me, is that so much of your success comes down to your ability to be a great leader.
Mm. So that's really interesting. So let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things I saw in corporate America is that you'd have really good people who are very talented as individual contributors, right? They might be really good accountant, or they might be a really good engineer, really good quality person, good in manufacturing engineering, say, or something. And then we always take those individuals and we would put them in leadership roles. And they were a good individual contributor, but then they got sort of promoted and they got moved into a leadership role. And a lot of times they weren't trained to be a leader, right? They were trained to be a really good accountant or a really good engineer, but they really were out of their league when it came to, being a leader and running a team. So, and what you just mentioned is really important in terms of your career and advancing your career, is actually having a team and effectively running a team and letting the organization see that you can run a team. So where did the leadership lessons, where did your leadership lessons come from? How did you develop that to be able to move higher and higher up the organization? Where did your leadership opportunities come from?
Yeah, one of the lessons, John, I learned early on is that you can give anyone a title, and then people will follow them because they have to. But that's very different from following that person because you want to,
Hmm.
right? And just because you now you went from an individual contributor and now you have a title where you're a manager or director or whatever it is, that doesn't automatically make you a leader. You have to choose to be a leader. And what I talk about in the book are that there are basically 4 traits that I found in people that are the foundation for someone who's a leader. And it's a strong sense of integrity, a sense of accountability, someone who's very collaborative, that they emphasize the team success over their own, and then a strong sense of positivity. And what I mean by that last one is I tend to view the spectrum of positivity or negativity as something that comes to a very fine point. And some people will see themselves as realists, but what I really believe is that in times of adversity, which way do you trend? Do you trend towards positivity or towards negativity?
Hmm.
Right. And that's where it becomes really important, because that's how you get resilient teams. When you have a team of people that, when times are tough and they're faced with adversity, are they going to roll up their sleeves? Are they going to see the opportunity and the challenge and help each other out and really grow? Or are they going to start to gripe? And are they going to complain? Are they going to point fingers? Are they going to, talk about how unfair certain situations are, talk about workplace politics, right? All things that you can't, sort of outside of your control. And we've all worked with people like that. And so I, tend to look for people that have that strong sense of positivity along with those other traits. And what I've learned is that when people have those traits collectively, for me, it's like a shortcut for trust. I know I can trust that person.
Right.
Okay. And when they also are the types of people that tend to engender those traits in other folks. And that's, to me, someone that I know can be a leader, even if they're an individual contributor. If they've got those 4 traits, then they're the type of person that someday is going to be able to rise to the level of being a leader.
Interesting. So it's funny because, we see, I think even I was reading a little bit about, some of the stuff that I read about you is that we see a lot of people kind of not happy at work, right? We see like half the workforce kind of upset, 30% engagement. And a lot of it has to do with leadership. And a lot of the things that you mentioned here, integrity, accountability, or being accountable, collaborative, and positivity, a lot of those things don't exist in managers, at least in my experience, especially managers that get promoted. A lot of them are just promoted based on they get results, right? The numbers get good, so let's keep moving this person up. We don't really care how they got the numbers. So how do you foster an environment where these are actually the type of leaders we want in an organization?
Yeah. So you said a couple of things in there, John, I want to address. One of the first things I like to tell people who are feeling lost or unhappy is actually, I tell everyone this, to define your North Star. When I interview folks, I do a lot of interviews. It's the very first question I ask everyone. What's your North Star? Where are you headed? What do you want to do long-term? Something to that effect. And you'd be surprised how few people have actually thought through it well enough to be able to give you a crisp answer. Very few people. Occasionally you'll have the person that says, I want to be a CEO. I want to be a CFO. I want to be, a software engineering manager, whatever it is, right? Very few people actually say that. People just sort of talk vaguely in terms of what's interesting to them, what they want out of their careers. And for me, the problem with that is if you were setting off on a journey in your car, you wouldn't just get in your car and start driving aimlessly.
Right.
If you were to pull over and ask someone for directions, the first thing they're going to ask you is, where are you going?
Yeah.
And if you can't articulate that for yourself, how is someone else going to help you?
Right.
That's the most important thing, is that you've got to define for yourself, where is it that you're going? And it's okay to change that along the way. For a long time, my North Star was to run a business. And I feel like in a lot of ways I've achieved that. And so, because at Axon, I own more than just finance. I, run the support functions in our consumer business. And so I recently redefined my North Star to be focused more on building and developing high performing teams that are having transformative societal impact. Because to me, I'm not focused on a promotion anymore. I'm not trying to, figure out what's next in my career. I have now the luxury to focus on others and developing their careers. And I want to do that in a way that's also having an impact on society. So you can change your North Star along the way, is my point. But you have to have that. You have to define it for yourself. And once you do that, you'll look at yourself differently. Others will look at you differently because they'll be able to give you crisper, more relevant advice for where it is that you're trying to go. I think it's also important to think about, autonomy, right? Like I'm very big on not being a micromanager. Okay. And this is something that, you have to be square with yourself. Like some people like being micromanaged. I think a lot of people don't. And you have to understand, I think once you've defined your North Star, okay, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, the company that I'm at, the role that I'm in, if I now project out a few roles in the future, will this help me get to my North Star eventually? Okay. If the answer to that is no, then you should probably leave, right? Otherwise, like you're wasting your time, right? You're not going to really, just by chasing a promotion or a bigger job title or, a little bit more pay, those things are typically markers of success. But if they're not helping you eventually reach your goal, your North Star, then that's how people end up getting disgruntled, right? Or not happy. Right. So it's really when you're seeking experiences and not jobs, right, that are helping you towards your North Star. That's what I found really helps drive a lot of fulfillment.
So talk about your early career. You had a North Star at being a C-suite in a C-suite position, in this case, a CFO. When did you develop that North Star? How early on, and how long did it take you? And what steps did you have to take to get to that end result?
I talk about this in the book, John, of an experience I had probably about 8 years into my career. I talk about those leadership development things that I did, and I had roles where I basically just kept my head down and worked hard. And somebody would tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, this job has come up. Why don't you come over here and take it? And I did that for a particular role at a division of GE where I had never worked before. And I get there, and a month later, my manager said, the manager who I came to work for, I had worked for him before. He then says, hey, I just got tapped to go somewhere else in GE. And so now I was in this, corner of the company where I had no network at all. I had no brand. People didn't know me. And I felt really like my career had stagnated and I was at a dead end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I stopped and asked myself, what is it that I want? I've been waiting for other people to dictate my career for me. And I realized if I keep doing that, if I keep waiting for someone if I just keep my head down and wait for someone else to tap me on the shoulder, I'm going to end up where other people want me.
Right.
So that's when I said, no, what is it that I want to do? And that's when I thought about what really excites me. And I love being an operator, right? It sounds like you've got a lot of this in your blood as well.
Yes.
And I didn't necessarily say the CEO was my North Star. I use the CEO title as a proxy because the CEO will, run a business. So I said, hey, you know what? I want to look at other CEOs and see how they got there through a finance track. And there are lots of CFOs that end up becoming CEOs.
Yeah.
So I started with the CEO role and I worked backwards from there. And I said, I'd love to be a public company CFO, maybe a private company CFO before that, maybe a divisional CFO. And I just kept working backwards from there. And I looked at all the experiences that I needed to go from where I was to where I want to go. And I wish I could tell you it worked out exactly as I'd hoped. A lot of it's serendipity and, luck along the way as well. But once I did that, I stopped focusing on the sort of markers of success that are traditional. I did get approached by recruiters to go take a job for more money, for a bigger title.
Right.
And I said no. And I probably wouldn't have said no in the past. But after I defined my North Star, what I realized was this job is not going to give me the additional experience that I need, the incremental experience to keep marching up. And that's something I look for now when I interview candidates and they tell me they've got 20 years of experience in whatever it is that they're doing. I really look to see, did they really have 20 years of growth, right? Where they took successively more challenging jobs and, different sets of experiences, or did they do the same thing 20 years, in a row? Those are very different experiences. And so I tend to be a fan of looking for new experiences. Right? If you did the same thing, if you're an FP&A, for example, and you grew in FP&A, well, even though you may have theoretically had different experiences, that's a very narrow track, right?
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. If you have a North Star, if you have a vision, if you have kind of a goal that you have in mind, I think you're going to tend to make different decisions whether than if you're chasing a dollar, right? Or chasing a salary or chasing a title or what have you. And in some cases, at least in my career, I was underpaid for what I was doing, right? I was moved into a job because of an opportunity that was helping me get to where I wanted to go. And I recognized that the reason I'm in the job is because I was young and they could pay me less than probably an older peer. But for me, it was like, that's a great experience. I just want the experience. I don't really care necessarily about, am I being paid fairly? I just want to get that piece of experience because I know that's going to help me get to the next level. Same thing with the relocation. I know you've traveled, you traveled in GE where they say, here's an opportunity. It's in another part of the country. And your comfort zone says, well, I'm really like where I'm living. My kids have a good school, but I would pick up and leave. I was like, that's the experience I need in my career to go where I want to go. I'm going to go take that job and I'm going to go to a place I've never been to before where I don't have any friends and take on a challenging role. And I think for me, it was all about stacking skills and stacking experiences so that I could get to the next level. And so I didn't necessarily think, well, I went one time to Florence, South Carolina, and ran a plant, right? So I went to a place I didn't know anybody and, never lived in South Carolina before, but I went there because it was a great experience. It was exactly what I wanted towards getting to that, like you said, your North Star. So I think if you have that North Star, you tend to make decisions based on what will get you there, not necessarily what's the best thing for your family or your pay right then. Because at least I saw that in my career.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you can do that. So, you mentioned, a lot of people are unhappy, and a lot of the reasons why they're unhappy because they haven't really established where they really want to go. What are some other ways that people get stuck in their careers?
I think a lot of people also don't put a lot of value. And I'm seeing this now in the workforce where they're not putting a lot of value in um, their own development, whether it's an
Mm,
MBA or maybe it's a course in speaking, or they join the Toastmasters, right? People tend to get there. There is such a thing, I think, as being overly focused on the experience. Just
mm,
because you started a company with your friends when you were 22 years old, and maybe it didn't work out, but it got to be a certain degree, certain level of growth and revenues and whatever, and maybe it didn't work out, but that experience alone is not enough. Like, there is a lot of value in something like an MBA. There's a lot of value in making the development in yourself. For a long time, I had at GE would give you lots of training on public speaking and just
hmm
being a very crisp and concise communicator. And I augmented that outside of work. I would take training classes. I did Toastmasters for a little bit. I would watch the YouTube videos and
Yeah.
learn all about, what is it that makes people what makes people very compelling speakers, compelling to listen to. All that stuff matters because, again, the further you get in your career, when you get into the C-suite, a lot of what people want to know, the other executives, a board of directors, they want to know, is this person credible? And
Mm,
are they going to be viewed as a credible leader by employees, by investors, by other business partners or other companies?
mm.
And so much of that comes down to communication. So making that investment in yourself. The MBA, I'm a very, very big fan of. I think everyone should, get an MBA if you're, in a corporate environment, because there's so much value, to be derived out of that. Also, just getting a different perspective,
Mm.
right? And being back in an academic environment, I tend to be a fan of doing it maybe when you're like a decade into your career, so like a part-time MBA or an executive MBA,
Yep.
because the longer you wait, the more you get out of it. It's really tough at age 25 to get the same thing out of an MBA that you could get out of it at 35 or even 40 or 45, just because you haven't seen enough, right? You
Right.
haven't seen
Right.
several business cycles or industries, et cetera. So I am a fan of the MBA, again, because it gives you frameworks and mental models in an academic setting that you can use in a professional environment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I do agree with what you said in terms of like waiting a little while. I did that in my career, and I think it made a world of difference because I was ready for it. Like I was curious. I had some experiences, but I really, it kind of put all the pieces together, at least for me personally. And so it is a good program. But I think I like what you talked about earlier in that portion where you said, it's about personal development, right? It's about growth. What are you doing to challenge yourself, push yourself, learn? How many people get in their car, they start up, they go to work, and they put on top 10 radio or whatever, top 50 radio, and they listen to the radio on the way to work. When right now, I mean, there's so many amazing podcasts out there about leadership and business and marketing and whatever your craft is, or what are the things you want to hone, your skills you want to hone. There's a podcast on that, and audible books you can listen to on your way to work. I mean, there's so many ways today you can learn just by exposing yourself to things that may be weaknesses, or you have a lot of interest in. I mean, right now, I think you can find so many different ways to learn and to grow. And I like what you said, public speaking is really important. So, how can you find opportunities to public speak even outside of work? And it sounds like you explored those as well.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, John. I really like what you said there. People talk about how we're in the golden age of TV, and there are
Yeah.
all these great TV shows. I think we're in the golden age of learning, and there's just so much knowledge out there, on podcasts like yours, on blogs. It's just easier than ever for folks to write books and to put content out there. And sure, yes, sometimes it's okay to sit back and watch TV or
Yeah.
listen to the
Yeah.
top 40, but you can get a lot of value out of just putting on a podcast like yours. There's just so much knowledge that you can gain, and it's all additive, right? The podcast you listen to, the YouTube video you watch on public speaking, or maybe I actually read a lot about human psychology and
Mm.
about how the brain works, and I read a lot about biases, like cognitive biases, because
Yes.
in my
Yeah.
role, like, you work with some really strong personalities,
Yes.
and both with other execs, with investors, and like
Yep.
I try to understand people's motivations, or how they're trying to accomplish what it is they're trying to accomplish. So reading about, things like that is valuable as well, but it's all
Yeah.
out there if you make the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. There never has been a better time to learn. I think it's a golden age of audio right now. It seems like
Yep.
you can get a lot of things, in an audio format that on your phone, and you can constantly be learning. I think it's fantastic. Um, so when you talk about leadership, let's go back a little bit to leadership and the skills you developed. So you mentioned integrity, accountability, collaboration, positivity. So what are some other characteristics that you found of leaders that get to the levels of the C-suites? What are the I mean, when you start off of your role as a leader, you might have a small team. You have maybe have 6 to 10 people maybe that you're leading. And then when you end up in a role like you're at, or I ended up at, you have very large teams, and you have, chain of command, and you have structure. What are some things that you saw evolve in your leadership style as you went to bigger and bigger roles?
Yeah. So I love this question. And I talked a little earlier about micromanaging versus not micromanaging.
Yeah.
I'm very big on not only giving people autonomy, but having empathy and understanding um, what it is that motivates people, right?
Mm,
Like, this was for me the switch that I had to make when I went from an individual contributor to a manager. I viewed my team initially as, okay, I've got these resources and they're doing work, and I need to synthesize their work and understand, there's more work getting done in one area, less work in another. Like, how do I, like, what's the yield maximizing effort, to make that work? And it's really not so much about that. It's more about people. Like, who are these people that are
right.
doing work? What motivates them? Why are they doing what they're doing? And what are their passions and desires, and what are their fears? And like, you have to really care about that.
Mm,
uh because, like, yes, the work itself is important and the work needs to get done, but ultimately, people who are in a work, the majority, I've found, the vast majority of people who are in a workplace setting care so deeply about their own development and
mm,
about doing the job right, and about having an impact and helping the company and maybe helping society, right? Everyone has that. So don't worry about that. Like, trust them, right? That's why the trust
mm,
is so important for me. And once you trust them, then you can focus on, well, what is it this person needs that I can help provide? Do they need help prioritizing, right? Do they need help? Maybe they're not so great with public speaking, or they put out prodigious amounts of work, but they can't really synthesize that into very concise bullet points. And you can't do any of that unless you have empathy and you really care about your
mm,
people and understand what it is that, that they need. The other thing the other reason this is important is you need empathy to not be a micromanager. And that's so important because the
mm.
higher up you go, the bigger your job gets. You will drive yourself crazy being a micromanager,
Yes.
right? It's impossible.
Yes.
And I've seen it. I've seen some pretty big leaders still be micromanagers, and they just work around the clock, and they're stressed out all the time, and they don't have great work-life balance, and their families are stressed, but then their employees are stressed. I could tell you, we talked earlier about making the investment in yourself and your education. There's nothing more demotivating than having someone come to you, a manager come to you and tell you not only what they want you to do, but how
Yeah.
they want you to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you made this effort, you got the MBA, you watched the YouTube videos, right? You
Right.
read the
Right.
books,
Yeah.
you listened to the podcasts, and now someone's trying to dictate
Yeah.
how to do, right? And that's another reason trust is so important. Um, I'm very big on failure as a teacher.
Yeah.
And I will oftentimes let my teams go down a path that I know is not going to end well,
Yeah.
because ultimately, like it's not the end of the world if they fail.
Right.
There are very few things that we do that have such dire consequences that we can't, walk them back. And I give them coaching, right? I don't want them to fail, but sometimes it's okay for people to learn lessons on their own, and they can't
Yeah.
learn that lesson any better than if they do it and it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. So failure is one of those emotional teachers, right? So it's very visceral when you fail. Nobody wants to fail. Everybody wants to succeed, right? When you fail and you have that chance to sit back and think about why you failed and what you can do differently, that's a much better teaching tool than, you know, putting the guardrails out and preventing anyone from failing. If you really
That's
want
right.
them to advance in their career and to really learn, they're going to have those times where they get burned. Their hand touched the hot stove and that didn't feel good, right? So I know not to do that again, right? So I think sometimes we even do that with our children, right? I'm a father. I've got 2 boys, right? We try to, try to protect them from having those experiences where they get hurt, right? But those are some of the best experiences that they were going to learn from that, right? And I think that's really important for our people. If we want them to learn, they have to have a chance to, give them the authority, right, to do the job. And I always say, as a leader, I always have the responsibility. So if they fail, I'm responsible, but I give them the authority to be able to do the job and have that opportunity to succeed or fail. And if we delegate authority, but we hold on to responsibility, that's the best way to go. The other way is you delegate what I see a lot of times is bosses will delegate responsibility, but they hold all the authority to themselves. So if they fail, they say, "Oh, see, look, you failed," right? And they throw their people under the bus if anything goes wrong. So we get that wrong sometimes. But I think it's really important that we delegate the authority to our people, and then we always protect them with the responsibility.
Yep, that's really well said.
Yeah. This is really good. So what? How can people find out more about you and this book? I think this is fantastic.
So my personal website is jawadahsan.com, and I've got a little bit of information there about myself, the book. The book's available on Amazon. It's paperback, hardcover. We got an audiobook, actually. The person that we had do the narration for the audiobook is fantastic. He did an amazing job.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I encourage you to listen to the audiobook. And if you want to check out more about our company, Axon, go to investor.axon.com. One of the things that I'm very big on is just getting visibility to my team. And so if you go to that website, you can see some of our earnings videos where we recap our recent quarterly performance in a video, just talk about the exciting things that we're working on the company. I love this company. I love Axon. Our mission is to protect life. Yes. The company used to be called Taser International, and we rebranded into Axon once we got into body cameras and software. But all of our products, everything that we do is geared towards either protecting life or bringing more transparency to law enforcement through our cameras and software. We're having an impact every day. And it feels like with everything going on in the country and frankly in the world right now, we were built for this moment, our products and our solutions. And it's pretty exciting to be a part of.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was on your website today looking at all the products you have, and you are definitely in a sweet spot right now in terms of the way things are moving in the world. So I think it's what you do at your company is really important.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. It's nice to meet you, and I really appreciate you being on the show and sharing all this experience. I think for those that are listening, wherever you're at in your career, hopefully you took some things away from it. And the biggest question you have is what's your North Star? What are you working towards, and how can you craft your career to be able to get to your North Star? And remember that the only person responsible for your career is yourself. Don't give that to someone else in the organization. They're not going to take care of you like you're going to take care of you. So I think that's probably, if you can remember those things from this podcast, I think it'll help you to get unstuck if you feel like you're getting stuck in your career.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks as well to visualize it. Write it down. And I've done this. I've done magazine covers, Fortune magazine covers, right? I've written letters to myself. I've written headlines and just imagine things. That visual is so powerful. If you can create that and just focus on it, pull it out every once in a while, and just remember why you're doing what you're doing, the visual is very, very powerful.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, this has been really good. I really appreciate you being on the show, and we'll put links to all of your resources. We'll put them on the show notes so people can find it. And I appreciate it. Thank you, Jawad, for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.